everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the ATACS podcast. We are adults, we talk about cool stuff, and today we are here to talk about a video game called The Legend of Zelda, Echoes of Wisdom. I'm your host today. I am Flex from Raleigh, North Carolina. Joining me, we have a round table of Zelda experts. We have Nate from Clayton, North Carolina. How are you today, Nate?
Doing well. I'd like you all to sign my petition to change the name of the video game to The Legend of Link.
Yes.
I could get behind that.
Yeah. I think that
just for accuracy purposes, you know.
Yeah, that checks out. Also joining us, we have Ryan from New York City. How are you, Ryan?
Okay. Making an echo of the snow.
Is it snowing there?
It did this morning. I don't know about now.
Yeah, all right.
I want snow. That's not fair.
It hasn't snowed here in like 3 years, so I think we're approaching a record of of a snow drought. And last but not least, joining us, we have Jax from Apex, North Carolina. How are you today, Jax?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fantastic.
I have a cat.
Not used to... I'm sorry?
I have a cat right here meowing at me.
We have...
Excited.
For audio listeners, we have two people on camera with a cat poking around. So if you hear some stray meows, those are just the friendly Zelda cats of the crew.
Mm-hmm.
They might be wearing their cat suits so they can understand the cats.
Cannot confirm or deny whether I'm wearing a cat suit right now.
I do have my cat suit on.
Of course.
Yes, and so we are going to be talking about Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. The date today is December 21st, 2024. We are all big Zelda fans, and this game was kind of a surprise treat this year after Tears of the Kingdom last year. I certainly didn't expect another Zelda game this year. I don't know about you all, but it's kind of a surprise in one of the summer Nintendo Directs, and just a couple months after it was announced, it came out. We have all played it. Nate, you have not quite finished it, I believe.
That is correct. I think I'm near the end, but I have not finished it yet. I've been playing it.
Mm-hmm. But you've played more than enough of it to be able to talk about it. And we're gonna dive in here. And to start off, when the game was announced, were you surprised? What did you think of the announcement? Especially, kind of the immediately noteworthy thing here is, for the first time in a quote-unquote mainline Zelda, not a janky CDI, Philips CDI game. You can... the lead in this game is the princess herself, Princess Zelda. That was part of the reveal. And also the mechanics, different types of mechanics of wielding echoes. So just kind of what were your initial impressions seeing the reveal that you're going to play as Zelda, getting a new game just the year after Tears of the Kingdom? Anyone want to start us off here?
I guess I'll start. I remember being kind of cautiously optimistic. I think it was based roughly on the Link's Awakening engine, which I didn't play the Link's Awakening remake, but I did enjoy the original, and I'd heard positive things about the remake. Plus, the Echoes things, I mean, I wasn't blown away or like super excited, but I was like, oh, that kind of looks, if Nintendo, or I guess Grezzo, does a good job, like that could be a fun mechanic, or it could be like a bunch of sandboxy nonsense. So I wasn't sure exactly what to expect, but when the reviews started coming out, I was like, okay, this is probably a good time. And it was.
Yeah.
What about you, Jax?
When I saw it, I just thought it looked really cute. But same with Ryan here. The Echoes, I didn't really know how that would work out, but they only showed a few different ways that you can use it in the trailers and the previews. So otherwise, I didn't really think much more about it. I was just going to wait until it came out.
think one of my main memories of that early trailer was them using beds for things. It's like, all right, Zelda uses beds. That's how she conquers the world. What about you, Nate?
Yeah, I was excited about it. I thought it seemed like a neat twist. Was definitely interested to see it, and obviously, some amount of the fan base has been clamoring for them to put Zelda front and center for a while and hoping for that. So it was cool to see them take that turn and run with it with this game. So I was excited. I didn't end up getting it right away, but I knew I was gonna get around to it eventually. So now I am working my way through it.
Yeah, yeah. It was definitely nice to see Zelda playable, and I mean, it feels like it was a long time coming, and I think it was also neat that they pitched that she would have like her own mechanics. Like multiple of you have said, it was TBD at that point to see how that would actually work out. But I like that even from their initial pitch, it was clear that like, okay, Zelda is her own character, she has her own way of doing things, rather than just being like a reskinned Link. So I thought that was neat. There's actually been some interviews afterwards where I think it was going to be Link, but then they kept, as they were building out the Echoes mechanic, they found the sword kept getting in the way. It's like playtesters would just default to using the sword because it's just easy to always use the sword. So they're like, okay, we need to encourage people to use the Echoes, so we got to take away the sword. But if we take away the sword, can it actually be Link? So they're like, there's like a whole process there of
can't be Link if he doesn't have a sword. Like, let's not be crazy.
Yeah. So, I wonder if there would have been any difference if they had started from the jump of being like, this is going to be a Zelda game, like playing as Zelda. But they got there in whatever roundabout way they got there, and it's nice to see Zelda as the playable lead and rescuing Link for once. And
yeah,
yes,
I think if they
ahead.
did start with the approach that this was going to be Zelda, I think it would have been a different game, because I did feel like Zelda was limited in what she could do because she could only really control echoes. And as we've seen in other Zelda games, Zelda can do a lot more, like even if she's not playable.
Are you referring to the CDI games?
I have not played that.
I don't know that any of us have. But yeah, I just in cutscenes and other scenes, easy example is Sheik. Everything she's able to do is Sheik. Like she is proven to be a capable character in many of the games. Yeah, and as Ryan mentioned earlier, this game is developed by Grezzo, who did the Link's Awakening remake. It has a lot of that same look to it, which I quite enjoy. I enjoyed the Link's Awakening remake quite a bit. But yeah, we'll kind of fast forward to when you actually started playing the game. So fast forward from the initial reveal, and you actually started playing the game. I guess we'll just talk about kind of the early game and especially your intro with the ecosystem. Once we actually got our hands on it and started playing the game, what were kind of your initial impressions of the game?
I mean, oh, go ahead.
Okay. I think it felt pretty experimental to me at the beginning, like just playing a Zelda game that looks and sounds and feels like a Zelda game, except you don't have the sword, and you're constantly getting this flood of new echo abilities, and you're trying to kind of figure out like what's useful, what's not, when to use things. Like that was my first impression, was like it felt very experimental, almost like in an uncomfortable way, just because it was such a turn from the traditional Zelda style of just just basic controls and mechanics for combat purposes, but like in a refreshing way. Like the more I play of it, the more I like it. But the initial thing was just like, man, this feels very weird. I keep wanting to run up to things and hit them with my sword, and you can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I guess for me, having played Link's Awakening, the remake, and then going into this, my initial impressions were kind of like comparing the two, because you do start out in the beach, area for both of them. And then also just stylistically, just adorable across the board. It's so cute. I could easily see, especially after playing more, how if they were trying to blend some of the different Zelda styled worlds together, this would be, similar or could be more comparable to like the Wind Waker tune Zelda games. Like I could see the transition between the two and how they're trying to put those worlds, whether or not that was intentional. They could have just been like, hey, we have Link's Awakening stuff, let's just reuse it. Uh, but yeah, I liked it. And then as I was playing, it did seem a little like more elementary, but as I played more, um I appreciated that they didn't make it too elementary, like it didn't go as far as Spirit Tracks.
I mean, I was now able to copy sea urchins and old beds, so I think I felt pretty set when I was in the early game. uh, Sea urchins in particular, that was a nice nod to Link's Awakening, and they were certainly one of my combat echoes for quite a long time.
Yeah. Yeah, the look of this game is really striking. We've talked about it a couple times, and I think it looked really good in Link's Awakening as well, and it works here also. It almost has like, for me, almost feel like it has like a toy-like quality. Like I can almost see like the characters as like little, they're not Legos because it's not blocky in that way, but like almost like I can envision it as that type of toy type thing where you like construct environments and have characters you can place in them, and then it's very picturesque like once you like set up the scene. And
Lego blocks.
yes.
Yes.
And there's something I noticed about the music as well, and I know I know not everyone pays attention to music the same way I do with the way my brain works, but the music was very like, it wasn't as full as like a full orchestra would be. It was very like, I'm pretty sure there's a musical term for this that I'm blanking on right now, but it was just like a small handful of instruments. You could imagine like three or maybe four people tops, like sitting in a circle, each with a different instrument. So and like you can very easily pick out each of those voices in the music. And I thought kind of fit the like more tactile, toy-like visuals. So the music kind of matched it in that more tactile way where you could pick out each individual instrument, which I thought was neat. But yeah, pretty similar to what you all said, like kind of getting your hands on it. The look and feel and sound is nice, and kind of the first introduction to the echoes, like just playing around with them. And yeah, the bed's one of the early ones you get, which we saw in the trailer, like being able to climb on it. So that's immediately what I did, was just started making stacks of beds to climb up places. It was nice they give you that one pretty early.
Yeah, for the music, just to what you said about the music.
Mhm.
I don't know, hearing your description of the different layers, whether they're instruments or however you want to term those things, that could be a nod to Link's Awakening. But also, just as you go through different areas, I could hear the influence from past Zelda music in the different realms, which I thought was neat, but they had their own twist. In my mind, I thought of it as a reflection of Zelda because it was her game, it wasn't Link's game.
Yeah, for sure. So as the game starts out, it's fairly linear for a little bit. You kind of have a little tutorial zone to kind of get used to, like you escape a dungeon, pop out on the beach, go to the southern village, which they spell in a weird way that I do not like, um, and go to a little town there, and then trot over to a dungeon through the forest. So you kind of get a little bit of everything. You get a small tutorial dungeon, a small town, a short trot through the forest, which is fairly contained, and then the first dungeon, which very much feels like an intro dungeon. Through that first section, I was feeling a little bit constrained. I was feeling like, oh, these echoes feel like there's a lot of potential creativity here, but I was maybe feeling like in tutorial land for maybe like a little bit longer than I wanted to. It's probably smart that they did it that way. But I definitely, once you get past that first dungeon, you can kind of just go anywhere, and the world really opens up. How did that moment of kind of clearing that first dungeon and being able to kind of go anywhere in the wider world, how was that moment for you all? Did you just go immediately to the next objective? Did you take time to like explore around and just meander about and see what you could find? Like, what was your approach as we kind of entered, like, right after those first impressions, if you just started, as you started entering like the meat of the game?
Yeah, I guess I approached it more as before everything opened up. I thought of it as, oh, this game is going to be like some of, not the original Zelda on NES, but the next Zelda's right after, where it is more sequential. So I thought it would be more like that. So that's what I was expecting until it opened up. Also, I call it the Soothorn like village. I don't call it Southern
Yeah, in
because
my
it's
head it's
missing a letter.
Soothorn.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it very well could be. They don't actually speak in this game, so we
I
don't
mean,
have
I
an
definitely
official.
think it's a. I think I think it's an intentional play on Southern for sure. But in my head, yeah, every time I read it, it reads as Soothorn.
Yeah. I think we're gonna have that issue with some of the other pieces of the game, including characters. Like I called TRI tree. I didn't call it try.
Not
I
try.
know it Yeah, I know it could go into try like Triforce,
Yeah.
but in my mind it was tree.
Yeah. Okay.
It sounded more magical.
That's totally fair. Uh,
So, as far as the game structure goes, I remember more of the second half because it's kind of like a typical Zelda structure where you have like an intro. It's three dungeons, then kind of like an event, and then is it three more
Yeah.
or is it a little? Okay, so it's
yes.
three more after
Yeah,
that.
you do
Okay.
that first one, which has to be the Soothorn temple or dungeon, whatever it's called.
So, Southern, I always thought Southern as well, just like with an annoying spelling, or maybe like Southern.
This is going to be what tears the ATACS podcast apart. But yes,
But
you do that first dungeon. You have to do that, and then there are two others: the desert and the Gerudo and the Zora ones. You can do those in either order. Then there's the Hyrule Castle event. It kind of comes back together there, and then the last three you can do in any order as well. So yeah, it is kind of a first three event, then last three dungeons.
and I do remember in the second half of the game, particularly, like that was the point where I actually started kind of avoiding the main quests and just literally like going through the whole world, doing all the rifts, doing all the side quests, visiting all the towns. And maybe we'll get to that, but I think at that point, it's a combination. That was a combination of like having all the tools available plus like the story sequences before each dungeon, I actually kind of got tired and annoyed of. Like I just want to go to the dungeon. Like, why do I need to like fix this problem with cotton candy or whatever? But but in the first half, I think I was fairly direct about going to the dungeons because I think you don't quite have quite as many echoes, some of the traversal tools, things like the jump accessory, which were really nice. Um, Plus, I don't even know if you can mend rifts at that point. I can't remember when you get that ability, but that's one of the things that you can do as sort of like a side quest is mend all like the minor rifts. Um, in particular, the first dungeon, I think you're not completely walled off, but there's a lot of the black stuff everywhere, and it's like you should go to the dungeon and like, you know, so southern, which whatever we want to call it. So the village can like get degunked, and you can talk to the guy who upgrades your weapons and stuff.
That's really interesting because Flex and I were playing at the same time and you took the same approach as him. Whereas in the first part, as soon as I beat the, you know, demo, practice dungeon, I just explored immediately. There was definitely stuff I couldn't do. I just knew I would come back and get it. But I built up some of my hearts. I got some new echoes, even though some of them were a little bit more difficult to obtain. You couldn't close rifts at that time, but I did take my time before going to, one of the areas.
Yeah, I explored what felt to me like pretty organically, like after getting out of the Suthorn area, um, just kind of wandered around for a little while when I realized, which I don't know, I was probably just being silly. Like it took me a while to realize, like, oh, I can just use echoes to get on top of trees and just like walk across the map. Um, like as soon as I realized that, I was like, oh, I'm just gonna go wherever I want, and nothing can stop me. I'm Zelda, and so I spent a good bit of time exploring like the main Hyrule Field area and around the desert area before I went and did the Gerudo dungeon, and then I kind of had the like this this cycle of like spending a good amount of time exploring but not being super exhaustive before every main quest engine area. So I kind of broke it up in that way, in a way that felt like very just and organic to me, where I would like, oh, I'll just wander around until I decide to go to the next main quest, and I didn't really think about it too much. But I do think the intro area works pretty well, even though it might feel a little bit constrained and long, but it does give you like the whole approach that this game has to like explore an area. There's lots of secrets to find if you poke around. Um, Lots of echoes you can gather up and things like that, and then you'll solve some people's problems, and then you'll go into a rift, and that'll be your like main quest, and you just kind of repeat that in every area of the game.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, as Jax mentioned, I did a little bit of poking around, but for the most part in the first half of the game, up until the Hyrule Castle dungeon, I stuck pretty closely to the main path. I did climb on trees pretty quickly, and that was a pretty magical moment of like, oh, yeah, you can just go anywhere. Like there's nothing stopping you from doing anything. So I think you probably...
I think it's really funny that like the map is laid out like a traditional Zelda map with all these like lanes and alleyways for you to explore between areas, but it's like, oh, none of this means anything.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there's no obstacle you can't just barrel straight through. If you're limited with some of like the early game echoes, you might have to get a little more creative on how you get up things, but it seems, I don't know, I think it's pretty possible to go pretty much anywhere pretty early on.
Yeah.
I I mean, they give you things like being able to bind or whatever it's called to like a bird and just have it fly around. So you just fly. And it's like you get stuff like that pretty early, which you can just get anywhere. But even with just basic stuff like building beds, you can be very creative in how you use that and get up to surprisingly high places. But yeah, once you realize that you can just walk over the trees, like that's not an invisible wall, you can just go. It's like, oh, okay, this is no holds barred. You just go anywhere. Um, but yeah, I did a little bit of exploring, kind of like what Nate was saying, like kind of as I went. But yeah, for the most part, I didn't do too much, especially once I did the Gerudo dungeon and realized in like that process, like the stuff you have to do in the lead up and then the dungeon itself, you get some pretty good echoes. Most notably from that area, the flying tile. Um, and then from the Zora one, you get the water block, I think. So it's like you get some really key echoes from doing those dungeons. And once I realized that from the Gerudo one, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna mainline this for a little bit and just get these echoes. And yeah, it was either right before or right after Hyrule Castle was when I did my first just wander around for a while without doing dungeons.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised to find that. I mean, there were some walls like height limits or like think around the Lost Woods. There's like just like kind of a hard wall, or you fall in and it respawns you or something like that. But by and large, yeah, especially in the second half of the game, I think like you said, you could kind of go a lot of places in the early game, but when you have like three trifor or three of the little triangles and like boxes and stuff, and you're having to stack up bit by bit, like that was a lot more tedious than like in the later part of the game when you can do 6 triangles worth and like you can use water blocks and you can get like there's like this frog accessory that like doubles your jump height, so you can just kind of like it's like, oh hey, there's a tree and it's like 4 water blocks, go swim straight up, and like now I'm like walking across the jungle or whatever.
It's amazing what 6 of those little pips and a water block can do. I did. Go
It's
ahead.
interesting that you think the water block is like one of the key echoes because I only used it when I needed to.
We're going to compare our most used echoes later, and it'll be an interesting comparison. It sounds like. I do kind of. Hopefully, this will make sense. One thing I think I might have appreciated more about the game is if there had been a little bit more. I don't know if it needed to go to the extreme of like having little puzzle rooms where you only use certain echoes. But I definitely fell into the trap of like once I got to the back half of the game, I had my staple echoes and I just relied on those and didn't use any of the 100 other echoes. So I definitely fell into that trap, and I kind of missed, as the game went on, I kind of missed the early game, like trying to figure things out with like a more limited set of echoes. Like there was a little bit more problem solving to that was kind of fun, even if it was like too tedious sometimes. And then later just being able to like use water block or the flying tile to just do 90% of things. I don't know if anyone had that feeling as you went on and kind of relied on some staples, but
Yeah, I don't know if we were going to specifically talk about the combat, but I think especially as you unlock upgrades, like the sword form was just always the way to go. Um, I kind of felt like, and then yeah, I mean, in terms of traversal, once you get things like water block and flying tile, and I guess early on it was like stacking beds and boxes,
Yep.
and beds, and occasionally like a spring or something goofy.
Or summon the wall crawling spider and bind myself to it and just hang on to it and see where it goes, and maybe it'll eventually get me up to that ledge. which I did do a couple times early on. Um,
I
Yeah.
forgot about the bind mechanic, except for like when puzzles basically forced me to use it. I was like, oh yeah, I could probably just like summon a bird here and bind to it.
mhm. So I actually do want to talk about the map a little bit. Maybe this is something only I noticed or care about. Did anyone else notice that this map is just straight up the Link to the Past map?
Yeah, definitely.
Um,
A
it
slightly
took,
modified version of it, but it is very close.
yeah, it's like the center part is like almost identical to the Link to the Past map, and then there's a new strip. It's like if the Link to the Past map zoomed out,
Yeah.
and you get a strip around the edges that's all new. That's almost like you couldn't even see it before on the Link to the Past map because it just didn't expand that far. But a lot of what's in the center, you have the castle in the center, you have Kakariko to the left of that, you have the graveyard and the sanctuary and the mountains to the north, you have the swampy area to the south, you have the desert in the bottom left, you have the Lake Hylia in the bottom right, you have the eastern ruins on the right, like the Zora stuff in the upper right, like the layout and the exact geometry matches like
Yeah,
one for one.
some of it is like the same exact screen. You can see it from A Link to the Past.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wonder where this fits in the timeline. That could have been intentional because I know there's with the timelines, they do consider the map layouts and how they would overlap with each other.
Yeah. They did say where it exists in the timeline. I forget off the top of my head. I think it's in the same timeline as Link to the Past, but it's not like right next to it. It's like a couple games before or
Yeah,
after in that timeline.
I'm pretty sure that's right.
And I don't know if the thing I don't know, and I don't know if we'll ever get answered, is it actually intended to be the same Hyrule as A Link to the Past, or is it just a tribute from Grezzo because they like A Link to the Past? Like, I don't know if we'll ever get an answer, an official answer on that or not. But it definitely stuck out to me once I started exploring a little bit of like, because I've played Link to the Past probably half a dozen times, and it's like became very noticeable very quickly that this layout and geometry is very, very near identical in many places.
I think it's definitely intentional, and it probably is like somewhat a cheeky like reference, but also just like we know this map works, and we like it's not like this is the first time it's been reused in a Zelda game. So,
Mhm.
you know, it's almost like a if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of situation when they're trying to change up so much of other things about Zelda.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, for
I
sure.
guess any sort of similarities, I also thought of it as, those eras of games, of Zelda games, this was like that. So I didn't really think twice about it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely some noticeable references. Like, think there's like the desert temple, but it's like broken in places. So where the entrance would normally be, it's just like totally collapsed in or something like that. And then I think you get one side quest in front of what would be like the Eastern Palace or something like that. So I mean, there were definitely some noticeable landmarks, but I think it kind of like it was like, oh hey, I recognize this from like a different game. It's like I wonder what they're getting at by just putting this as like an inaccessible part of this game. I don't know that I ever like zoomed out and looked at the entire map, but I definitely
Yeah,
recognize some of the landmarks.
mhm. Like when I play other Zelda games, I know they put, either direct things from other games in it, or they put Easter eggs, or they have nods to them. So that's when I think more about the timeline and where it fits in the timeline. And even with the overlapping of maps that I mentioned before, like they've laid out like the different Zelda castles and like, oh, here's the North Castle, etc. And how some of they all work together.
So how did you all like the map? I think as far as like the top-down Zelda games go, is one of the bigger ones, maybe the biggest. I don't know for sure. Um, but how did you like just exploring this world and the different environments and the size of the world and all of that stuff?
I would say maybe it was just a touch large. Not a major complaint, but I do remember maybe like, and as I mentioned in the second half of the game, after getting a lot of tools that made moving around easier, I I did just kind of like spend a bunch of time exploring and looking for side quests. I think touching some of the corners of the map, like the desert, which is fairly empty, was maybe a little tedious. Um, and on a related note, I think the game has okay performance, but it felt like, especially in parts of the overworld, it was running at like a consistent 20 frames per second, which I didn't love that either. Um, but but yeah, I guess I would say it was probably a touch. It was fun to move around, but maybe it was a touch big because some of the corners felt empty and a bit tedious to get to. And then things like using the horse was not very practical because you run into like a forest or something and like then it's like, all right, I'm going to use echoes to climb over this. See a horse. Like you can't call it or anything. So there's not really like I didn't feel like there was a reliable way to like speed up the traversal. You just kind of like go over everything.
Yeah, I thought the horse was very funny. How useless it is, and it's like almost perfunctory. Like, oh, you got to be able to ride a horse. It's a Zelda game, right? Um, even though that's not a thing in the 2D games. Um, I was surprised when I found that. I was like, am I just missing the sparkles? I was like trying to make an echo of the horse so that you could summon a horse anywhere you wanted, but you can't make an echo of the horse. So I
I
found
don't
it
even think
very
I
silly.
thought about making an echo of the horse.
I was like, oh, how am I gonna find a horse later if I want one? Am I having to come back to this one? No, of course the game would just let me make it an echo, and then I can summon horses whenever I want. But no, no.
That is a
You
great
put a carrot
idea,
on the
and I
ground.
totally didn't think about it.
Yeah, you can summon the horse though, right, Jackie or Jax, where you just
Yeah, you put a carrot on the ground and
yeah.
the horse comes to you.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I
I
couldn't
did
remember
not
what
know
the
that.
method was, but I was pretty sure you could summon it.
Apparently I
Yeah.
missed that too, so you're not alone, Ryan.
Yeah, I mean, I did all the horse side quests, so you would think that I would have picked up if there was some hint about that, but no, alas.
Yeah, I agree. The horse was pretty perfunctory, but also in Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, I never
Right,
used the horse in those games either. Um,
right.
and also the fast travel in this game is pretty generous as well. There's a pretty good number of
Yeah.
fast travel points. So if you need to cover a long distance, there's usually a fast travel point closer to where you're going anyway.
Yeah, that's why the world didn't feel too big. Doesn't feel too big to me at all. Like if I want to go from one end of the map to the other, I just fast travel. Like it doesn't. It makes the map feel small to me. How much fast travel there is. It's almost like there's little pockets you go jump between the different zones. But I would not just walk across the whole map. Although that probably is a good way to just find some secrets that you've overlooked is to always walk everywhere because there is kind of stuff everywhere. Um,
Mhm.
in terms of just like general like exploration and traversal and stuff, kind of I thought a lot about how it's like taking some of the design design ethos of the Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom route of games and taking that into the 2D Zelda style, which I think is interesting. Like a lot more creativity and freeform exploration, and like where you can really go anywhere you want, and there might be something there, kind of style, versus like the old school Zelda style of like finding the right key to use at a certain spot. And I don't mean just keys, but like items like using bombs in the right spot and that kind of thing. And this game has some of that, but it feels a lot more just like freeform, creative style of exploration than more like the recent 3D games than a lot of the older 2D games, which I like.
Yeah, I think that's my number one takeaway from. I'll reiterate this at the end, but I think that's my number one takeaway from this game is like seeing them do a top-down, mostly 2D Zelda game with kind of a similar openness and more freeform structure that define Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Seeing them kind of translate that in their own way to like a top-down game made me realize, like, this was the game that made me realize, oh, this is just Zelda going forward. Like, we are done with the old, quote unquote, the old school style progression and unlocking the world in a more systematic way. Like, kind of as we mentioned earlier, when you get out of that first dungeon, and you can kind of go anywhere. Like, I think that's just Zelda games from now on, where you have like the core mechanic early on, and you're just free to kind of go wherever. I think the old era, excluding remakes, because we'll probably still get remakes, but like, I don't think they're going to make new games in that old style. I at this point, I think never again we're going to get that.
I was smiling earlier, Nate, when you were talking about fast travel, because the same time that I was playing this game, one of my coworkers was also playing, and so was his son. So him and I would talk about this game. And we found that we were both, for some reason, we didn't know you could fast travel from anywhere. So every time that we wanted to teleport, we would walk to one of the little cactus things and then teleport.
That's funny. That's funny.
But he did it too. So
yeah,
like,
I mean, some games do that. They make you go to the fast travel spot to travel to somewhere else.
Yeah. And then when I found out that you can just do it from anywhere, I was like, well, this is just too easy.
Yeah. It really is super easy to just zip around. And the thing that really weirds me out in this game is how many fast travel there points are within dungeons. And you're just like zipping around inside of a dungeon. I'm like, this is weird. I don't know.
Yeah.
Something you said earlier, Nate, was that the number of fast travel points almost make the map feel small, which I agree with, because it is a big world. Like, it's objectively, if you measure it, like a big world, bigger than most, if not all, the other top-down ones. But it felt smaller in a way to me because of the fast travel, I think. I don't know if that's for better or worse. That was just something I noticed.
Yeah, I agree with
I do
that.
think the dungeon bit was pretty nice though, because I think most dungeons had a part or a point at the entrance and a point in front of the boss door. So it's like if you go to the boss door and I don't know, do you need a big key? Like you find the boss door and you're like, I can't go in yet. Like, so then you go find the big key or whatever, and you can just like fast travel back to the boss door without having to like backtrack through half the dungeon or whatever.
Yeah, functionally it works totally fine. It's just it is weird to me, like being in what feels like a traditional Zelda dungeon, and the way they usually design those is they're like wrap back in on themselves and have multiple layers to it that you're going between, and made it like essentially the same thing. Like you'd find the boss key and then suddenly you'd find yourself back at the boss key door and you're like, wow, that was convenient. This time they're just like, oh no, we'll just let you fast travel. It's cool. We don't want to think that much.
Some of the older ones did actually have, not in the overworld, but they would have, once you beat the mini boss like halfway through the dungeon, there would be a warp point from that room back to the entrance. Some of the old ones did have that, which could make running back like deeper into the dungeon easier. But yeah, not to the level that this game does, for sure.
Link's Awakening.
Yeah. I did use the fast travel uh when I got stuck in a dungeon where I knew I didn't have something, but I went and got like the heart piece in it anyways. Took a long time with all the echoes that I had, and I knew I wouldn't be able to get back out. So I just fast traveled after I got it.
That's a good point. Fast travel is kind of like, I mean, the game feels like they tested this game pretty thoroughly. I didn't really run into like weirdness of getting stuck or whatever, but it's probably possible. And the fast travel does give them an easy out for like, oh, if you get stuck somewhere because you thought of something extra creative with the echoes that we didn't think of while making the game, and you just got in a weird spot, then you could just always fast travel out.
Yeah, for sure.
So in terms of like our order through the world, did all of us do the Gerudo dungeon first, or did anyone go to the Zora dungeon first?
What about the Goron dungeon?
Which
You
half are we
can't do
talking
that.
about?
So after the first dungeon in the Southern Forest, you have the choice to go either to the desert Gerudo dungeon or the Zora dungeon in the river area. Which one? I think Nate, you
Gerudo.
already said you went to the Gerudo.
Yeah, I did the desert first. Yeah.
And Jax, I know you did. Ryan, did you do the desert one first?
That sounds right. Yeah, I believe I did.
So then there's that, and then there's the Zora one at the rivers, where you have a whole fun back and forth about who's the better instrument player. That went on maybe 2 steps too long.
Re- Remember that part
Right.
of me talking about like how I kind of avoided the main quests in the second half of the game because it was always that. It's not like, in Link's Awaken or in A Link to the Past, you find a dungeon entrance and maybe you have to solve some puzzles and then you walk in without any like preamble. Whereas in Echoes of Wisdom, every single dungeon, like you're having to go through all this dialogue and like do all these fetch quests, and it's like, I mean, I kind of liked the Goron one, and the Gerudo one was maybe kind of funny, but I did not like the Deku Grub ones, or like, and like you said, the Zora one just got so tiresome.
Yeah, that was. I was planning to get to it later, but I think it's fine to talk to now. That was one of maybe my least favorite part of the game was the dungeon lead ups, because yeah, they were very rote. It was very much go talk to this person, now go talk to this person, and there was usually not anything interesting about going between those people to talk to. It was pretty straightforward. Some of the stories were better than others. Some of them were, I think, pretty bad. Very, I don't know, just not really much to them, but they took up a lot of time. And it really hit me later in the game, like as we kept doing more of them and they didn't get shorter. Because like the last dungeon or two I did, like doing that kind of lead up to the dungeon was just like, okay, this is more of this than I want to do. This is more dialogue and like kind of walking back and forth. So that is definitely one area of the game that I would, and it stands out too, I think, in a game is so freeform as we've been talking about, to have these very scripted sequences leading up to a dungeon that aren't short. Like they can take an hour. I don't. It's been a couple months since I played, but like these are not short sequences where you're going through a lot of dialogue, and they're very scripted and very prescribed, and it felt at odds with the openness of the rest of the game.
For me, it depended on the characters and the story, like you said. So I actually love the Deku Scrubs. I love them so much. They're like my favorites. I was really happy to see them again in a Zelda game because it's been a while. Um, so yeah, I could see them being annoying, but I was like, yeah, I'll get your cotton candy. Look at you, you're so cute eating it.
I don't know. I mean, some of the jokes were funny. The jokes about like, they steal the tri-rod, and like you're having to break out of prison. I it was funny too because I broke out of prison and then I walked back and talked to the guards and they threw me back into prison.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know though. I thought the whole thing was kind of annoying. It was also, I think, the last dungeon I did, so I was definitely feeling the side quest or the main quest fatigue
Mm.
or whatever that we talked about.
Yeah, that was
It felt like some of the dungeons should have just been like walk in, right? I think I
yeah.
would have been a
That was
little
the last one I did too.
yeah.
Yeah, so does everyone remember the order? So we all did the desert first, then the Zora one, and then you have to do Hyrule Castle. And then there are the three afterwards. There's the Deku one in the forest, there's the Goron one in the mountains, and then there's the ice one on top of the Hebra mountain. Um the Goron mountains being like, I guess, death. Is
Death
it called Death Mountain in this game? I assume it is.
I think it is.
Elden Volcano.
Oh, right,
Oh,
it's Elden.
Elden.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
there's
And
Elden
then
is the fire mountain, and then Hebra is the icy mountain.
They're right next to
called
each other.
Mount.
They are.
I can't say this word even in the other
Oh,
games.
Lanayru.
Yeah,
Lanayru.
Linearu. Yeah. Yeah.
Which all of these are familiar or names that have been in other Zelda games.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the order I did them after Hyrule Castle. I did the forest, the Deku Forest, then the Goron, then the Snowy Mountain. What order did everyone else go in?
Ice first. Then fire.
Okay, so the exact opposite of me.
Yes, yes.
Nate and Ryan, do you remember your order?
I did the forest first, and then Goron, and I haven't done the ice mountain one yet.
Okay, so you're the same as me.
Same. Yep.
Yeah, and for me, in some ways, I think it's a little fuzzy because not only because I played a while ago, but because where I was exploring, I would like dip my toe into a region and then or maybe even see the first part of the quest and then be like, oh nope, I'm going somewhere else. Um, I think I did Elden first, then Hebra, then I guess Lanayru. The last two I'm not sure on, but I think I did Elden, Hebra, and then the forest.
Gotcha. So slightly different order. I don't know how to compare notes on if the different order changed much for us. I can't remember if there's any like if you get anything in the Elden volcano that would help in one of the other regions. I can't remember if there was anything specific like that. I was kind of curious if the different order we did created any different experience, if anyone remembers anything here.
Yeah, for me it did. I mean, part
How's
of
that?
it was also because in Echo, I just didn't realize you could pick it up. But so I started, with the ice and I got the floating cloud. So then when I went to the Elden volcano, I used that a lot. Um, so they had those air spouts, right?
Uh-huh. I know where this is
And
going, yes.
yeah, we realized later that you
Because I
could
had this
pick up,
problem too.
yes, I did not pick up a bird to traverse through all of those air funnels. So
Oh
what I
dear.
would do was I would, shoot up in the air and then I probably I think I used a cloud, stood on a cloud, used a tile, stood on the tile, flew as far as I could until I could land somewhere. So I did use those clouds a lot there. I just thought it was supposed to be like a hard puzzle. I didn't know you're supposed to use birds.
I also didn't know you were supposed to use birds, and Jackson and I talked about this on our own. I don't remember them ever like introducing that to you or teaching you that you could hold onto a bird and fly up the little gusts and then glide over. So like I also did the entire Elden area without ever riding a bird on a gust.
Nice. Yeah, I don't think they ever
Think
tell you that. I don't know why I figured it out, but I remember starting the Elden area and finding one of those areas with lots of lava and the little gusts that you're supposed to use to get between safe land and being like, this is crazy. I don't know what's going on here. Like, I feel like I'm supposed to be able to fly up these things somehow. And then at some point, I figured it out. Like, I think I had used a bird once or twice to like glide off of ledges to get somewhere, and so I was doing that to just like check for things I had missed as I was going up the mountain, like trying to glide down, and hit one of the gusts, and it took me. I was like, oh, I'm just dumb.
I do think that someone either maybe in the earlier main quest or around the volcano will just tell you like you should, you can grab onto a bird. Like I think they mentioned it somewhere kind of pointed. And if you do the side quest like I did, and you do like the Elden Ring of Pain or whatever it's called, where the guy has you like do the glide the bird through the little gauntlet, like, I think the game tries to give you some hints, but I could see how like it would be easy to miss, like, because it's not a lot. Like it does not. I don't think it forces you. It's just like, hey, here's this one part where you should do this.
Yeah, I couldn't do that mini quest for the longest time because it kept saying to hold on to a monster, and I was like, oh, it has to be a bird. But I would always bind myself to the birds, and it would just take me the wrong direction. So,
It like flies out over the lava, and then the binding
yeah,
wears
and then
off.
make me start over again. The reason I figured out that I could pick up a bird is because I used to spam birds. Like they're so cheap. It was one of my main echoes actually. And I was just spamming them so fast that I accidentally picked one up. And then I was like, whoa, you can carry these?
Kind of what you have to do to grab them, because they always fly away from you directly.
Yeah, which was pretty fiddly. Yeah, so I
See,
ended up learning the same way you learned, Ryan. The difference for me was I didn't do that side that side quest until I had done everything else in the Elden area, including the temple. So similar to Jax, I solved all of that in like the temple and the mandatory path by mainly using the flying tile because I hadn't gotten the cloud yet. So I did it without that as well. I remember one specific room where the vents were laid out in a tricky way that I had to do a very complicated process of boxes and beds and flying tiles and stuff to get through, and the boulders that could clog because the big boulders can actually, I think, clog the vents. Um, it was a whole complicated process, but it was also kind of fun to like try and figure that out. Kind of what I was saying to something earlier of like when you don't have ever like the really OP echoes, which I think the cloud is one of the OP ones. That one's really useful. Um, it can be kind
yeah,
of fun
and
to figure
and
stuff out.
to your question in general, like I did wonder, like, because I did feel like parts of Elden were pretty tricky, and it was like, oh, I wonder if like having some kind of ice echo from like Hebra. And I think maybe Lineru was actually kind of easier for me because I had a couple of, you can get like lava slugs pretty easily from Elden, and you need to burn a lot of stuff in Lineru. So I don't know if it's intentional or if they designed it, and I don't remember it being like a super big thing, but I wouldn't be surprised if like, getting fire echoes from or from Elden makes Lineru easier, and like getting ice from Hebra makes Elden easier or stuff like that, or the cloud.
So we've talked a lot about different echoes at this point. I think maybe now's the time to just discuss our most used echoes.
It's
Um,
time.
who wants to kick us off here? We have a volunteer.
Well, when you say most used, like our actual used, or as we played the ones that we used? Because for me, they changed as the game went on.
Whichever way you want to describe it, you can choose.
I mean, I think it's totally fine to have a split too, right? Because like when you get Zelda's bed or like the good quality bed, you don't always need to use the old bed anymore unless you're building bridges.
Yeah, I still use the old bed.
I use the old bed too.
Well, when it came to recovering hearts, I did use the beds for that as well,
Yes.
And pajamas.
and
Yes, in your
pajamas
pajamas.
sometimes.
I guess
Um,
for me, early on, I used bats like all the time because they were cheap. If I think when you first see Link, I used the bats because he was so fast and he could kill everything immediately, but the bats could come at him from different directions. Um, so I used the bats later, replaced them with crows at some point. That pink bird, because I think I got the pink bird before the crows. I don't remember the order anymore. But even later on in the game, I just used the crows most of the times. And then my top five, just overall, because I went back and checked, it was crows, because I use crows no matter what. The Pathblade, that was my second favorite, if not my first favorite. So if I didn't need something in the air, I would just use the Pathblade, which is the spiral like blade that just runs across the ground. And it actually can kill a lot of stuff. It just takes sometimes the harder ones like more hits. But it can survive and the monsters can't kill it. So those were the ones I spammed the most. And then at some point, I called them bloopies. The little squishy ball things. I use the fire one. And then just for necessity, it was the trampoline and the platform that goes up and down.
What the bloopies thing? What were those the Zols or?
Yes, the Zols. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was like, I think I know what she's talking about, but I forgot what its name was.
Yeah.
Your top list is very different from mine. The like little floor spikes, that's interesting because I like barely use those, and it sounds like you got a lot of use out of them.
Yeah, they were so because it was cheap, so I could just use those in the crows and they would cover anything flying and anything on the ground. And then monsters would go after them and they would just die to the pathway.
Nice. Very nice. Volunteer next to talk about your most used echoes.
I don't have my game in front of me, but I know what my top three most used are. Number one was water blocks. Once I got water blocks, I used that for traversal for everything. I stopped early before that. I used beds and trampolines to get everywhere. And then once I got water blocks, I was like, well, I don't need anything else. I'll just swim everywhere. And number two was crows, so I'm totally with Jax on this. Just spam the crows and then let them dig it out with whatever there is, and then run around and collect the rupees that they knock out of everybody. Just don't even care about what's actually happening. I'm just gonna get the rupees and move on. And then number three for me, I know, is bombfish. I like throwing bombfish at people.
Mm-hmm.
Bombfish.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and that's kind of also your bombs in the game, so you end up using for puzzles and stuff a lot too, or at least I did.
Definitely use them for puzzles, but I would also literally just spawn them and pick them up and throw people all the time.
I did like using them. I feel like I didn't use them as much because they just hopped around, so they didn't always.
That's why I pick them up and check them, because otherwise they just flop. It's just a directional attack. But yeah, other than that, I kind of play around with like a lot of the just basic guys. I feel like the problem I ran into a lot is when I tried to use like the high cost echoes, like a level 3 Lizalfos or something. They would just like hop around and not do much. Like, I don't know what it is about the AI in this game, but whenever I summon something like big and costly, it was like super ineffective. And then it would get like it would just like get totally dominated by a Keese.
So I kind of feel you there, although I will say that and one of my probably top views towards the end of the game were the dark nuts. Because if you're on top of an enemy, they just launch into their spin attack, which does a ton of damage. So you could like position yourself like right beside an enemy and like summon a level 2 or a level 3 dark nut, and it would just start like spinning to win.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
did just get to the point where I can summon 2 level 2 dark nuts, and like sandwiching an enemy between the two of them is pretty effective.
Yeah, later game, I did use whiz robes more like that because if there's a monster there, as soon as they appear, they just start shooting.
Yeah, it ended up not being one of my top ones, but the electric whiz robe I started using more towards the end of the game, and like definitely moved up my my most used list towards the end.
Yeah, sometimes you need like a projectile attack, and I use the spear moblins occasionally, but man, they were not. I think the whiz robes were a nice alternative to be like, they're probably going to hit this thing eventually and like do a bunch of damage and like set something on fire or electrocute it or whatever.
Yeah. What were some of your top ones, Ryan?
So I guess, and before I get into my list, I did want to say a couple things. One is that I like the way that the echoes, a lot of the echoes are kind of like monsters from um, previous 2D Zelda games. So like, and sometimes some pretty deep cuts too, like the flying enemies that drop bombs. Like that's kind of this weird enemy from A Link to the Past, and you can just like start
Mhm.
creating echoes of it and like make a bunch of them. Forgot what they're called. Um, or you've got like the Zols. Um, you've got like a bunch of these kind of, and I think the way they modeled them generally looks like pretty. It fits the style of the new game, but it also is like kind of in some cases a nod to like that type of enemy. Um, and then the other thing I wanted to mention real quick was just that it was interesting, and this is kind of coming up in our discussion, but it was interesting to see the differences in what people used. So like my brother was in town visiting, and he actually I think cleared one of the dungeons. We played a little bit together, and I let him take over for a while. And so I liked early game. I like to use the sea urchins a lot. And then when he came in, he liked the crawltulas a lot. So there were times where he would use them and they would be really effective, and I'd be like, oh, that's really cool. And then there were other times he would summon one and it would just go like off in a random direction, and he would still kind of stick to his guns. So I just thought it was kind of funny, like the different ways we all approach the problems. As far as the echoes I use the most, of course, I think I would second Nate in terms of like, early on you use beds, boxes, and trampolines a bunch, and then you get like the water and the flying platform, and you can just kind of use those for traversal. For combat, I did use sea urchins a lot. They were almost like a melee attack, and some enemies they made look really silly because the enemies would just charge into them. It's a little disappointing that they never get an upgraded version because they only do like half a heart of damage. So in the later game, they became kind of ineffective, unfortunately. But I was fighting bosses trying to drop sea urchins on their head, which was pretty amusing. Um, Past that, we talked about a few others like Wizrobes, Moblins. I did use the Dark Nuts a lot, the level 2s and the level 3s. Because if you don't have sword form or whatever, it felt like the Dark Nuts would, you could summon them on top of an enemy and get a free spin attack. And then in some cases, you could just kind of leave them sitting around and, they had armor. Like some enemies couldn't even hurt them, or like, they were pretty tough and survivable. Um, yeah, those were probably the big ones in terms of combat.
Yeah, that definitely echoes some of those combat ones because yeah, late game, I also felt like just needed some more survivable ones. and definitely started using the Dark Nut level 3 later on, the Wiz Robe that I mentioned. And I guess spoilers for Nate who hasn't gotten there, in the final dungeon I used the Lionel a lot, because Lionel's just strong. But you don't get that until like right at the end of the game, that you just don't get a lot of time to use it. But I used it a lot in the time I had it. I also used, I think you get this one at the Hyrule Castle, but like the ball and chain armored guy who swings that around. That was my go-to big boy for a little bit. Still didn't enter my actual top 5. But yeah, I have the game open in front of me right now, and if I look at this list, my 5th most used one was the Flying Tile. My 4th most used one was the Ignizol, the fire one.
Oh,
I think
they were useful.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely was useful for some types of puzzle things or just setting things on fire. I think I spammed it a lot because it was cheap. So if I even if I only needed one, I would just mash the button and pop out as many as I could. So that's probably why it's actually in the top 5. But I did use it a lot. My number 3 was one of my combat staples for a big chunk of the game. It was the Boomerang Borblin. Just like the Boomerang Moblin type guy.
Mm-hmm.
I also used that one because it was cheap, because pretty early you get the price reduction, so it only cost 1 little pip. So you can just spam, like, I would just, through a large chunk of the middle of the game, I'd get into a combat encounter with just like normal enemies, and I would just like spam 4 or 5 of those guys out at once, and they could, with their boomerangs, they could hit both ground and air enemies, and I would just let them go to town. And then my top 2, the old bed and the water block, the traversal staples. Water block, obviously, just get everywhere super easily. It almost felt like a cheat. The water block plus the flying tile, like those two were just, I don't know.
I feel like whenever I tried to use the water block to get across things, they just didn't work as well. I don't, because I know you said you use that a lot, and I was just like, how is this useful all the time?
Did you use it vertically? That's my main use, was just stacking
water and then going up. Okay.
Yeah, water block was my vertical traversal, and then the flying tile was my horizontal traversal. So I would use the water block to get up somewhere high, just stack 5 or 6, and that could pretty much get you up on anything in the entire of the game by the time you could get 6 of them. And then once I was up where I needed to be, flying tile gets me across. And that.
Gotcha. Yeah, I use the clat booms for those, because then you can, from up high, put another one up and jump on that one.
Mm-hmm. Were those the like elevator-y things?
Mm-hmm. The yellow ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did use those a lot before I got the water tile. Those were definitely very useful.
Oh. And I guess one thing I forgot to mention, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but I did think just using the beds to restore hearts was kind of fun. Like, I mean, sometimes even in the middle of combat, you could like just find a corner and drop like a bed. Didn't do that often.
And I
usually just use the smoothies, but like, you could be in the middle of a fight and just be like, oh, this isn't going well. Like, I'm going to walk over here, like, drop the highest quality bed I have and just like have Zelda like sleep for a couple hearts worth.
Yeah, that is is extremely funny gimmick that this game has, and it does serve a purpose. I ended up not doing that very much after I realized like smoothies were very easy to just get lots of, and there was a side quest for getting more types of smoothies. So I was constantly just drinking smoothies to clear inventory space so I could make more smoothies. So I ended up just using that as my healing source. But it is very funny that they made that like a mechanic in the game.
Yeah.
And it refills hearts surprisingly quickly. Like once you get the best bed and you're wearing your PJs, like it refills pretty quickly. It's actually not hard to restore hearts even in like a frantic fight.
Yeah. I always felt weird about having Zelda like going on an adventure in a nightgown, but I was tempted. I was like, man, my combat set should totally just be like Zelda in her nightgown. Like, always have the royal bed ready to like.
Yeah, I guess now's as good as place as any for that. But yeah, I mean, once I had the nightgown, that was, especially in dungeons, that was my main that was the main costume I wore because it was one of the only ones with a functional benefit inside of a dungeon.
Yeah, I did for a little bit, but then I felt later I didn't really need it. So then I went back to the cat suit.
Mhm.
And I did do like a little recording and some like screenshots of me in the cat suit at the end after defeating, like doing the Elden area and all the Gorons are celebrating with you and I'm just a cat.
I,
Nice.
That was really
I wore a
entertaining to
lot
me.
of cat suit. I was always looking for cats. I did a bunch of like side questing in the middle of the game, and I was always looking for cats to like speak to.
Yeah, I was let down. There weren't as many cat quests. If you have a whole cat suit to talk to cats, there should be a lot of cat quests.
Yep.
Yeah, plenty of the cats were like, "Excuse you, I'm trying to sleep here." And I'm like, "Well, that is an appropriate thing for a cat to say." But
Yeah, it
I
is.
have to say, I'm a little disappointed.
Yeah, there's actually what I did talk to all the cats as well. I was there's one cat in the Gerudo area that's on top of all the buildings and you have to climb all the way up there to talk to it. And I really wanted it to be something special and no, it was just a I'm sleeping cat, you know.
Hey, nice to meet you.
Yeah.
hmm Yeah, those were definitely when I was exploring. It was usually cat in the overworld. It was usually cat costume in dungeons. Usually the PJs. Did anyone have any costumes outside of those two that they gravitated towards, or was it pretty much? I mean, those are really. I don't know if there were any other ones outside of those two that had a functional benefit. Most of the other ones were just cosmetic,
Yeah.
unless I'm forgetting something.
Yeah,
I
I
Yeah.
think
don't
I wore
know.
the I think I wore the dancer costume a little bit because it extended your spin attack, which was nice for like maybe cutting bushes.
Mm.
So when I was just like cutting bushes for rupees or you do the mango mini game, like I think I wore the dancer outfit a little bit for that. And I did like I think it's the her base costume for this game. It's like it's like the princess's attire, but I think it's like with short sleeves or something like that. It's like the princess's
Mhm.
travel
Yeah,
attire.
royal
I thought that
travel
was
attire.
a kind of a cool style. I think I actually, when I finished the game, that was the costume I was wearing. I was like, which of these do I like the
And
most cosmetically? Because I think you get like the
yeah.
traditional princess attire, like the full dress and everything. And I wore that, or I used that for a little bit, and I was like, it just looks so awkward for Zelda to be in like the full gown and
I
like jumping
agree.
over trees.
I did the same thing you did. I did switch to the travel outfit at the end because it was like the coolest one. I liked when she had a ponytail because I was
Mhm.
just imagining as she was spinning, she was just whipping people with her hair. Um, and I also felt the same way about the formal gown. I was just like, even for nostalgia's sake, this looks so uncomfortable.
After you're wearing the travel attire, it's like, I'm sorry, Zelda, I'm not going to put you through this. Like while you're having to deal with all that cotton candy and stuff, just don't need to have like the full the full formal outfit.
Mhm. I actually didn't get the dancer outfit. I feel like for both the clothes and the accessories, I don't know, and it doesn't tell you if you did or didn't get all the outfits or accessories. So I'm sure there's stuff I missed.
So Ryan said a word earlier, that word being mini game,
Mhm.
which does remind me there were multiple mini games in this, as there often are in Zelda games, but it did remind me that there were a couple characters that I wanted to get your impressions on,
Oh,
and or mini game related. We'll start out with maybe
hmm.
one that will garner maybe a little bit less of reaction, but the dojo guy in Kakariko probably had the longest series of mini games. Did anyone really like or dislike the whole combat challenges and
Oh,
the Kakariko Dojo, because there were quite a few of them. Like if you did all of them, it was quite a lot.
Yeah, I liked him a lot. I didn't have any issues with him. I think also because of the other Zelda games, I just felt like, oh, it makes sense that he's here. Like there's always that
Mhm.
person to, if they don't directly train you, you know that they have some sort of skills in a Zelda game. I
Mhm.
did beat all of them except the very last one, where it's when you unlock all of them, uh, the ultra one is you just beat all the bosses in a row. So that's the only one that I didn't beat. It just
Yeah.
took a while every time I tried, and then I didn't have enough energy at the end.
I also got up to, but did not beat that one. When I saw what it was, I was like, I don't feel like fighting these bosses again. I just didn't do it.
I did it like
'Cause
three times.
yeah, it sounded like it would be long. Was it long?
It was long.
Yeah. Um, Nate, Ryan, any thoughts on the dojo guy before I ask you about the next character?
Yeah, I think the dojo was fine. I wish some of them were more like unique challenges, kind of like what you had mentioned, wanting more of earlier. Of like, I wish it was this very bespoke challenge where you had like a specific subset of echoes to try to solve this weird puzzle or combat encounter with like non-ideal options.
Hmm.
Like that would have been a more fun way to do it instead of a lot of them are just like, oh, here's a room full of enemies, just spam stuff and you'll be fine.
Yeah. Which there were a couple of them that did do that. There were a couple that started you with no echoes
Correct.
and you just had to pick up what was in the room. So, and I actually did really like those ones. I'd forgotten about that until you just mentioned it. But yeah, those I actually did really appreciate. Um, but
Yeah.
you're also right that a lot of the other ones were just, yeah, you just go in with your full move set and just barrel through it.
Yeah, and I still feel like even the ones that were the pared down, like you didn't have all your options, like they could have done a lot more with that idea than they did.
I agree.
I think yeah, I mean I probably would echo the sentiment. I think I did finish all of them. I thought some of the boss rushes were a bit long in the tooth. Like, I mean, you could kind of speed run the early bosses if you had like fully upgraded swordman form, but it still was pretty long doing like all six bosses back to back. Um, and then I thought the the shtick was kind of funny too, like become the ultimate Snorri or whatever it was, like this whole dream
Mhm.
battle thing. I thought that was kind of like mildly amusing.
Mhm.
The one that gave me the most trouble was one on ice where you had a time limit and they wouldn't let me bring my ice shoes that made me not slip. They wouldn't let you have your outside gear. I was very annoyed by that because I wanted my ice boots.
I think
Um,
I used bind to like drop all those enemies off the cliff or whatever.
mhm. I ultimately did as well. Bind was very useful for throwing things off cliffs. I actually did that a lot. By the way, the water block is not just good for traversal. It's also surprisingly good for combat. You place a water block on the ground, bind an enemy, drag it into the water block, and it drowns.
I didn't think to bind the enemies into it, but I did drown some enemies,
Hmm.
especially annoying flying enemies that would just charge you. I'd just be like, well, here, have a water block.
Yeah.
That ice level that you're talking about, I found that if you use the fire, it's actually faster than binding. So
Mm.
there is like a torch in there. And once I figured that out, I was like, whoa, this is so much faster than trying to bind and drop them off. Because you slide everywhere when you do that.
Yeah, I slid off of that level multiple times. Um, Next character I'm curious if there are any opinions on is one that was just posted in our chat, which is Stamp Guy, who brings some tingle adjacent energy but is not tingle. And
Yeah.
a part of me kind of wishes they had just had tingle in there instead. Um, but I did like getting a reward for exploring the map, which is kind of what Stamp Guy's purpose was. I don't know how I feel about Stamp Guy as a guy.
Stamp guy, Stamp guy looks like he wants your soul, but but yeah,
I mean,
functionally, I like Stamp guy.
I guess, like you said, kind of functionally. Also, I mean, you got to respect his enthusiasm, right?
Dude
Like,
just loves stamps.
there's like nobody else doing this, nobody else cares about it, and you show up, and he's like, "Hey, would you like to collect some stamps along with a reward?" And it's like, "Sure, I guess."
Yeah, I did like his energy. I really wished he was Tingle. Like they just had to change his clothes color and make it one whole unit hard. then,
Eh,
then you have
I
Tinkle
don't
because
know.
it's exactly Tinkle. I love Tinkle, and Tinkle was all about maps, and this was a map guy that also collected stamps. He should have been Tinkle.
It
Yeah, I mean,
definitely has very Tingle energy to me, and
Yeah.
feels like he could have very easily been Tingle.
it would have been very, very easy to make that tingle.
Yeah. I mean, I still liked Stamp Guy though. I thought of him as this was Tingle before he became Tingle. This is what made him Tingle.
This is the Tingle origin story we always
Yeah.
wanted.
Yes, exactly.
This is the shtick he was trying out before he became Tingle. He
This
had to change
is
his-
what drove him to be Tingle.
Yeah.
Nobody cared about stamps enough.
Except for Zelda.
Except
And
for
then
Zelda.
Zelda inspired him.
To put on a unitard.
I, I think one thing that also is maybe makes this side quest slightly more, I don't know if interesting is the right word, but I think like collecting stamps at like tourist locations is kind of a thing in Japan. Like maybe at shrines or like, so it probably, it probably makes a little more sense in the context of like a Japanese audience, but because I think at one point he talks about like how elaborate the stamps are or something, and I'm like, that to me totally sounds like if I were like, going to like a shrine in Japan.
Mhm.
Probably my favorite thing about Stamp Guy are the little like illustrations on the stamp cards of him just like super buff, like
Yeah.
paragliding and stuff.
All right, the last quirky character I'm going to
Oh
call
wait,
out.
one thing about Stamp Guy is functionally, I also liked him because it forced you, if you weren't going to do it and you did want to do the stamp collecting, like you would find different areas across the maps. So it had like multi-purpose. So you might as well collect stamps while you're doing it.
Yeah, for sure. He's like the classic Nintendo character of like Nintendo loves doing this in their games, especially in Zelda games. He's another classic example of Nintendo has an idea, like a gameplay thing they want you to do, and they turn it into a character. So they contextualize, like this one's pretty straightforward. They want you to explore the world, so they turn that into a character.
With a big smile and like buff art and the in his little cards or whatever.
So is that all on Stamp Guy now?
Mm-hmm.
So the last quirky character, and I want to ask Jack specifically about this one, is how do we feel about the Acorn guy?
He's asking me this because I have a very strong opinion.
I'm ready to hear it.
I don't know why, but I hate him so much. I think he's like a psychopath or something. Because like when he's out in the wild, surrounded by monsters, and if you're just crossing his path, he's like, "Hey, do you want to find some acorns?" Like, Why? And like, why don't you jump off of this cliff into the water surrounded by jumping spiders? Like,
Like these acorns within 60 seconds.
And then
I was
and
gonna
he just
say, did
throws
he like
them around.
talk down to you or something like that? But you do have a point. I think he did, like, at one point it was like there's these like piranha infested water or something like that, and it's like, hey, go collect these acorns.
yes,
I didn't even
yes.
I didn't even think
Look.
about it. I just did it.
Look, Acorn guy may not make sense to mere mortals like you and I. He works in mysterious ways. He he exists as a part of the fabric of Hyrule. He is unbothered by the monsters. He just wants to see if you can collect all these acorns in under 60 seconds.
I mean, I guess like I kind of just wanted to see if he had a piece of heart or something.
Yeah.
Like, now that you mention it, it's like, why would I ever want to collect like 14 acorns in like shark infested waters?
Yeah.
Like, for 20 rupees or whatever. This is not like Squid Game or whatever.
Yeah, he didn't give you good prizes. I think only once he gave you a hard piece, like once, but
Yeah.
otherwise his prizes weren't great. He was just like, yeah, try not to die.
I like Acorn guy, for the record. I get excited when I see him. I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna get these acorns. You watch me, Acorn guy.
I actually did kind of like doing his little
Yeah.
puzzles. I actually thought they were
Yeah.
kind of fun.
I think they're fun.
I agree he's a maniac and that his
Yeah.
prizes are lame, but I also kind of enjoyed doing his insane puzzles.
I didn't mind the puzzles, but just something about him rubbed me the wrong way.
Oh yeah, he's gonna murder you in your sleep, but chasing his acorns is kind of fun. So a couple other topics before we steer this podcast home. We haven't really we talked about the lead. We've talked a lot about exploring the overworld and the lead up to the dungeons. We haven't talked a ton about the dungeons themselves. Just kind of a couple aspects here and there. But I just want to just open that up to, does anyone have any big thoughts about the dungeons? For myself, I do think this was probably one of my, this is going to sound stronger than I mean it, one of my bigger bummers of the game is I don't think by Zelda standards the dungeons were that strong, especially for a game that had a good 7 or so dungeons and was kind of structured in a way where dungeons were a main point of the game. Unlike, the Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom ones where dungeons aren't really a focus. Like this one had dungeons as more of a focus. And I don't think they were, I think the puzzles in them were just very easy and straightforward. And the big joy for me in this game is the overworld. Like exploring the overworld was a lot of fun. But I think the dungeons, could have had more bite to them, more, I don't even know how to word it, but I think especially those last 3 dungeons when you just had so many echoes is like, I was just barreling through those dungeons and the puzzles. They were just, they felt trivial. And when I think of the classic 2D top-down Zelda games, like the dungeons were really good. So
Yeah.
it felt like they wanted to have dungeons, but then they just didn't. I don't know. For me, they didn't really hit. And I guess I'm curious if you all have any other thoughts about the dungeons.
I agree with that. They didn't really get complex until the very end, and then you're done with it. And a good example is the ice one, where they slowly taught you that you're supposed to make those like pedestals like hot or cold and get through them. And it wasn't until the very last one that I was like, oh, this one's actually a little challenging. I want more like this, but that was the last one.
Yeah, you just reminded me of that mechanic with those pedestals and the hot and cold. That feels like a classic Zelda dungeon mechanic that most of the dungeons in this game didn't have something like that. And even that dungeon, the ice dungeon, didn't use it as fully as they could have, I didn't think.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I guess
Go ahead, Ryan.
I was going to say, the I mean, I don't recall the dungeons that much. Like, I don't think they were necessarily bad, but like you said, I don't think they were necessarily great either. We talked a little bit about the preamble that every single dungeon had and how that was kind of annoying. I did like, and I guess one other thing of note is that I don't think they really had rewards per se. Like, you didn't get like a hook shot or whatever. Like, you mostly just unlocked new link powers, which were like the bow was good and the rest were kind of there. Um, but I did like the inclusion of the 2D, similar to Link's Awakening, and how sometimes there were like different puzzles and different applications of like, you had like the strantulas, and sometimes you would use fire or like your arrows a little differently. And those sections felt snappy as well. I did like that kind of reference to Link's Awakening. But yeah, overall, don't think they were necessarily bad, but I don't think they were particularly memorable either, from what I can remember.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think they're just fine. Uh, solid enough to get the job done, but not any like standout memorable ideas going on in those dungeons, which I feel like is maybe kind of the trajectory that Zelda has been on for a little while, of just like not really having it when it comes to like dungeon design. They've clearly steered like their interest and their design focus more towards like exploration and creativity and those things that shine more in an overworld setting. And they just either aren't focusing on dungeon design as much, or don't have the people working on the game who think of it as that as like the core identity of Zelda at this point, because they just don't have the same level of like complexity and building on ideas that the classic Zelda dungeon would have had. But I enjoy them fine. I agree with you, Ryan, that I like the transition from like top down to side scrolling and how that changes things. I think that was a cool way to kind of change things up in dungeons. But yeah, I mean, even thinking about it now, I've been playing it for the past few weeks. Like, none of the dungeons stand out to me as like, wow, that was a cool like moment or idea or setting. It's just like going through the motions for the most part.
Yeah, and I definitely, and we said it earlier as well, that like that's the direction the series has gone over the past 6 or 7 years, is less emphasis on dungeons. Um, I think the dungeons stood out more in this one because they put more dungeons in it compared to like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Like those had less emphasis on dungeons, but there were also just less dungeons. Whereas this game has more dungeons. So it's almost like they wanted there to be dungeons and it was a focus to some degree, but still clearly not the main focus, because yeah, you're not really getting new gear like Ryan mentioned, like you're not getting a hook shot or something. Um and the emphasis is clearly on the overworld. So it still feels like a weird thing that they haven't quite solved what to do with dungeons in this modern era of more open Zelda games.
Yeah, I guess that's why, like early on when we started talking, I said it felt a little elementary, is because those dungeons didn't get super challenging. So I thought maybe, they're going for a younger audience.
Yeah, I can agree with that. Kind of the last main question I had, before we kind of get to like our wrap up thoughts and favorite and least favorite stuff, does anyone have any thoughts on the story of this game, or any of the narrative aspects? Um, in some ways, a fairly straightforward and not. I mean, I don't think the story is a focus either, but I did want to at least give space for anyone to speak to it if they had thoughts.
Like just like Jack said, elementary is the word I would use, right? Like it's very children's story kind of writing and set up and characters. Like everything is so clear cut and like immediately understandable. Kind of what's what's going on and what's going to happen from beginning to end every time you stumble across one of the little storylines before a dungeon. It's like, oh, I know exactly how this is going to go, how it's going to end, how it's going to change the characters involved. Like, it's all very just surface level. Like I said, like, it's not bad, it's just extremely basic.
I would say a couple things. So, one nitpick I have is that I think they called the Triforce the Prime Energy in this, which I don't get why they do that. They did it in the Minish Cap as well, and it's like it kind of annoys me when it feels like they're making it like the legally distinct Triforce. It's like you guys are Nintendo, right? You can just like put the Triforce in a Zelda game, but that's just kind of a I guess a bit of a pet peeve. But I did like kind of Zelda's role in the story. You know, we talked a little bit at the beginning of the podcast about like having Zelda as the protagonist, and I think the way that the story flips the roles is like very fitting. Like I think some stories that try to do like female protagonists like sometimes drop the ball by just trying to make them like the same as a male protagonist but gender flipped. Whereas I think Echoes of Wisdom does a really good job of like having Zelda be Zelda and Link be Link, right? So Link is like when you're traveling through Hyrule, people are talking about like the helpful swordsman who like doesn't, I mean, I think he can talk, and he's talked to people, but maybe he's like he doesn't talk that often, and like then he gets trapped in this like world of darkness, but he's still kind of like a heroic figure, right? Like he saves Zelda at the beginning of the game. Like there's a part where I think Null is about to like catch Zelda, and Link just shows up and like hits him with a stick. Um, and then like Zelda borrows Link's power in the swordsman form, which is something that in a lot of the Zelda games, Link will borrow some aspect of Zelda's power, like the ability to use the light arrows or the goddess harp or like things like that. So it's pretty cool the way that like and Zelda's ability in Echoes of Wisdom feels like a very Zelda ability, right? It's very magical. Like it's still useful in combat, but it's like more focused on like manipulating the world and solving puzzles and like doing things that aren't like fighting with a sword, right? So I thought that the way that they flipped the roles, while still having kind of like a Legend of Zelda adventure, like was really um, was really well done. Like it felt like Zelda was still Zelda and Link was still Link, and like the way that the characters acted and the way that they fit within the story was kind of how you would expect, like if the roles were turned around.
Yeah. Anyone else have anything here?
Yeah, I guess just overall, if I'm thinking of the higher level story, like the overarching, bad guy doesn't want to be, stuck in the upside down by themselves and wants to get more power, and then comes to, the overworld to do that and starts destroying stuff. And then uh I feel like there just wasn't enough emphasis on it, even though you were going around and collecting like I forgot what they were called. I have it written down. The little sanction stones. Um, yeah, I felt like there wasn't as much emphasis, and then at the end, after you got rid of the big bad guy, everybody was like, ha ha ha. That happened. And then they just keep going.
Mhm.
Um, so there was kind of that elementary, kind of generic feeling of the larger story, and you couldn't really grasp onto anything. I think what stood out more in the stories were just the smaller stories and just the individual characters and the cultures in the different areas. And I don't know if that was intentional or, you know, they didn't know how much more to add because they had built so much smaller things in the game. Like how much to add to the larger story, I mean. Um, so I feel like it was pretty generic in that sense, and it could have been more unique. I think they leaned more on the fact that you're just playing Zelda the whole time, which just made it different. But if say somebody has never played all the Zelda games before, and this was their first Zelda game, and they didn't know that you never played a Zelda, um, I think they would have been happy enough, but they probably wouldn't have gotten like a big Zelda themed story.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think I have much to add here. I agree with a lot of what's been said by all three of you. I think my main takeaway from the story is it is pretty straightforward and elementary. And I think for the most part, I like what they've done with Zelda as the lead. I think there are a couple moments where it's like they kind of pander to her pander to her in a way that they would never do with Link. Um, which part of me is like, Zelda's capable. She doesn't need to be like, I don't know. Some of that can maybe be excused by that she's a princess, but um, it's like they're overprotective of her in a way that they never were of Link. So I think there's a couple of things around the periphery like that I think they could have handled better about Zelda, but I think for the most part they did it. They did it perfectly well. And really, my main takeaway from the story is it's just very, very, very simple and straightforward. There was a moment where I thought this was going to be almost an origin story of sorts with the way they were presenting, like they were calling the Triforce, the Prime Energy, and like with Null and everything, but it didn't actually go that way. And with where they've revealed it in the timeline, it's definitely not an origin story. So, the only other comment I have is, which is a spoiler for you, Nate, but at the very end, when Link is actually helping you in some of the final fights, you can't use the Link form yourself because Link's there, which I thought was, I mean, it made sense narratively, but mechanically it was odd because you get like upgrades, like you spend a lot of resources to get upgrades for the Link form, and then they're just not useful at all in the final battle because you can't use the Link form. So I thought that was kind of an odd mechanical thing, which made sense narratively, but it was also like, man, why did I give that dude all that all that money or whatever the resources were to upgrade this Link form? I can't even use it at the end. But anyway, not really a big deal. I just summoned the Lionel instead.
Yeah, I mean, I did kind of like the way that played out, although Link's AI wasn't always the best.
Yeah, I agree.
I think he was basically invincible, so he could just keep fighting, and that was pretty cool. But
Yeah.
yeah.
So there's nothing else on the story. We'll kind of get to a couple wrap-up questions here, or I guess not just stories. Before I ask the three wrap-up questions, which are your least favorite parts, your most favorite parts, and what do you want from future Zelda games? Before we get to those wrap-up questions, is there anything else I've missed that anyone wants to shout out before we move on here?
My other thoughts fit into those questions. So,
all right, I got you
good.
covered.
I'm good. Yeah.
All right. See, I guess we'll just go around the horn one question at a time. So, first off, what were your kind of your least favorite or parts you would want to be improved the most? And maybe we've already talked about these, so maybe we can go through some of this a little quickly. But we'll just kind of go one at a time. Jax, you want to start us off here?
Yeah, I think a lot of it we've said, wanting Tingle, hating the Acorn guy. And that, there are garments that you would collect that didn't really have a purpose. We talked about that. I think the main thing for me was how this game was advertised. You were supposed to be saving Link, and I felt like you didn't really do that. I mean, he was an enemy in a lot of the game, and then at the end he showed up. I mean, well, he was an enemy because it was like Dark Link, basically. But at the end he showed up, and you didn't really save him. It was almost like he saved you, like because you couldn't beat the bosses without him. And I, and yes, maybe that's in most games or all games, Link is the one who really defeats the bosses, and Zelda does do the assistance. Um, but at the end, I really expected Zelda to be able to do more, and instead Link came in and he saved the day. It's just, why did we spend all of this time if Link was going to be the hero at the end when you were supposed to be saving him, and that's how they advertised the game. So that's what I had an issue with. It was almost like, would there never be a time then where Zelda uses her power, her wisdom in her own right to do something successfully? Um, so that's one issue. And then the other one, which we haven't mentioned, is Dampe. I I at the end I just like turned out all those um I can't automatons, and then I barely use them. They're really hard to use because they would take a long time, even if you use the item to spin them faster. Um, and they just died so quickly. You have to wind them up every time they get hit. So it was just like, even when they added him to Link's Awakening, I thought, why would I do this? But in this game, I thought they would integrate him better, and I still felt like you could have ignored him the whole time.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned him. I actually had a note to ask. When we were talking about our most used echoes, did anyone actually use his little machines? Because I did not. I did all the quests to make all of them and then never actually used them because I don't know, just didn't see the point.
I did
Same.
at the beginning of boss fights. I would launch one of them with all the other echoes that I create and just see how long it lasted, but I didn't go back and restart them.
Mm-hmm.
They sounded powerful, and there may be ways to like break the game. Like maybe one of them lets you jump really high, or one of them, I don't know, generates a bunch of rupees or puts enemies to sleep or whatever. I can't remember what they did, but yeah, it to me it sounded like way more tedious than just spamming echoes. So I did the quests because they were quests, and then didn't really try using them. And I was always confused about what I don't remember if it was like a smoothie buff or what, but I was like, what is this key speed thing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just maybe both.
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot. I was gonna say one more thing about Zelda, is just, where does this fit in what Zelda, as in Zelda the Princess, a timeline, especially with Impa, because with Zelda's ability to potentially do more, Impa did not in this game teach her anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All those make sense to me. Anything else there, Jax?
No, that was pretty much it.
Yeah. And I do agree on the and it's not that Link's never had help either. He's had characters help him and save him in other games where you play as Link, but it definitely stood out where like, oh, here's the first game you play as Zelda, and yeah, Link's a big part of saving the day at the end as well. It would be nice to see a game where you play as Zelda and she is like the hero and does, the final saving at the end. I definitely agree with you on that. For sure. Nate, what's the thing or things that you would most want to see improved in this game?
Yeah, I think it's all stuff we've pretty much talked about. Like, I would just like to see a little bit more complexity in dungeons and story and characterization and those sorts of things. Like, just a little bit more to interact with and to chew on and to and to think through would be nice, just to have that another level to it.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. Anything else there?
Not really. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like everything about this game I like. So in a way, I'm like, there's not really anything that I super dislike about it. It's just like, oh, I just, it could be a little bit more tuned to my tastes, I guess.
And Acorn guy.
Yeah, I need more Acorn guy. Really, I need Acorn. I need Legend of Acorn guy to come next.
Or it's
Be
Acorn
the
guy
next game
versus
in the
Tingle.
timeline.
No, see, now they need to make a Zelda fighting game, and you can play as Tingle or Acorn Guy and have them fight each other. Mhm. Brian, what about you?
Hyrule Warriors.
Yeah. Is Tingle playable in Hyrule Warriors?
Tingle is playable in Hyrule Warriors.
Okay, well now we need Stamp Guy and Acorn Guy playable in Hyrule Warriors.
So let's see the things I like least about it.
Yeah, or things you'd like to be improved.
Well, the sea urchin didn't have a higher level form. That feels like a huge missed opportunity. I guess more seriously though, it's stuff we talked about. I think the performance in the overworld was a bit rough. Like the game was, it didn't feel like it broke down, but it was like kind of consistent, like 20 frames per second in a lot of places, which didn't always feel great. And then I think in particular the preamble sections, like for every single dungeon in the game, was way too much. Like some of it probably would have been okay, but like having to do that pre-quest for every single dungeon and not being able to just like start a dungeon was pretty tedious.
Yeah. I agree. Anything else there?
No, I think those are the big items that I can think of.
And mine's quick because you've all already said pretty much all of it. But yeah, it's I think there are parts of this game that they could have pushed more in. They could have been a little more ambitious with. I think I'm going to kind of wrap up my next question, which are what's the favorite parts of the game. My favorite parts are, I think the echoes are really fun. I think they're creative. I think exploring the overworld and traversal with the echoes is fun. I don't know that I ever loved the combat with the echoes, so maybe that's something else I'd want to be improved. I don't know that I ever found a lot of combat in this game felt like summoning an echo and waiting for it to attack the enemies, and the AI on the echoes wasn't always the greatest. So that didn't always feel great. It got better as it went, and you got stronger echoes. But I think the exploration was a lot of fun, and the stuff in the overworld, which fortunately, in terms of the amount of time you spend playing, probably is, the main thing you do in the game is roaming around the overworld and finding echoes and using echoes. I do think most other parts of the game I think could be improved. I think there actually is a lot of room for me and my tastes. I think there's a lot of room for improvement. I think the lead up to the dungeons, as we talked about, the dungeons themselves, the combat, the story, I think all of those elements have room for them to do a little bit more. But I did really like the look of the game, the music, all the aesthetics. I liked exploring. I liked the echoes. All that stuff was really good. I had a good time with it. Maybe stayed once I had all the powerful echoes and just kind of sticking to my core set. The end of the game maybe fell off a little bit for me, but for the most part, just really enjoyed exploring the overworld. That was definitely my favorite part, and we've spoken a lot to the other parts that could be improved. So go back around, and what were your favorite parts of the game? Jax, how about you?
Yeah, a lot of the things that you said, what I would add in there. Oh, I did like music a lot, by the way. But what I would also add is just the characters. There were some that were okay, but for the most part, like I loved Conde, the snow man. monster. I don't know.
Mhm.
But he was just so
You haven't
endearing.
seen him yet, Nate.
Oh, yeah, he was
Sorry,
so
Nate just had a
endearing.
confused look on his face.
Oh, yeah, he was very endearing because I feel like he was a very unique Zelda character. There's always these different stereotypes and personality types that you find often in Zelda games. And he was different. Like he had a different type of motivation, just how he acted, and it was just very sweet, very
He's a sweet
wholesome.
boy.
Yeah. Uh, the Deku Scrubs, like I said earlier, just bringing them back and their chaos, just having that chaotic energy back in a Zelda
Hey,
game.
I didn't think
Uh,
about this until you just said this, but I'm going to ask this question and I may regret it. Are the Deku Scrubs, are they the Rabbids or the minions of the Zelda universe?
The
like as
rabbits
in,
or the minions?
No, like,
yeah.
do they fill that? I mean, Rabbids and minions are like equivalent creatures.
Oh,
Like,
I was gonna say they seem the same. I
yeah,
was just like,
are they adjacent to both of those? I guess I worded that weird, but like, are they a
oh
minions type character of the Zelda universe?
Yeah, they're
no.
minions adjacent.
I would
I
say
would say
no.
no. Yeah, they're not,
Because
They run around and scream a lot.
but
they're
they're not
actually
obnoxious.
they're pretty dark actually, like in
Yeah,
the
You don't
64 era games. Like
you
they're
don't think the
associated with
rabbits and
like
minions are kind of dark and nefarious?
no,
I don't know, are they associated with the Lost Woods and like people turning into like, you know, uh
yeah.
like Stalfos? Uh,
I guess
I
they
feel
are
like
slightly different in different games.
Yeah, they are.
In this game,
yeah,
they weren't dark.
yeah. I feel like rabbits are just extremely obnoxious. Like, I mean, I think there's a video.
I have derailed this podcast.
Yeah, you really have. I think there's
you
like
said
where
you
they're just
said you
like
would regret
scooting
it.
on the floor and like, rubbing their butts on the floor across like the whole background.
Sounds
Like
right.
I don't think Takey Scrubs would do that.
They just sit there and eat cotton candy. Anyway, I am sorry for derailing this. Continue with your thoughts. You liked the Deku Scrubs, is where you were.
Yeah, yeah. And I liked seeing the Gerudo village again and the cats. I think specifically the Gerudo because even though their personalities were still in line with other games, I don't know if it was stylistically for this game, it felt a little different. Um, and as far as just other characters, even though the story wasn't great in the Zora world, I did love that they brought in two Zora types because uh, the River Zora, which are in other Zelda games, they kind of don't come back, and they are different from like the Zoras that we see in like Ocarina or even in later Zelda games. So I like that they distinguish the two, but then still have them as Zoras on their own. Their story was obnoxious though, but not
It's like a
rabid obnoxious.
there's like a rivalry between the two too as
Mhm.
well.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think if it wasn't so long, it actually could have been a charming story too.
Yeah. Oh, and I
Yeah.
like making smoothies.
Mm-hmm.
I think,
Business shrub.
yeah, I feel like Plex, you didn't make as many smoothies as I did.
I made enough to complete the quest, and I think that was it. Actually, I did make a couple at the end of the game. There's whatever like the super ingredient is, the golden something.
Good,
Uh,
good.
yeah, I made a round of smoothies with the golden eggs because those were very powerful smoothies. But I didn't end up using many smoothies. I don't know. I guess I felt like I didn't need them. But
Yeah, now that you say that, I think I still have a pile of golden eggs because I only used one as a tester and then I never used them again because I wanted to save them.
Mhm. classic, classic hoard my items for an emergency and then never end up using them.
Yeah.
Anything else there about the stuff you like, Jax, or does that cover it?
Yeah, and really the thing about the smoothies is that whoever made those, whether it was a team or a person or what, they spent a lot of time like thinking about the combinations of the smoothies and designing the smoothies, and because there's a lot of variety, and as you create different versions of each smoothie, there are subtle changes when you change the ingredients. So I really appreciate that, even though it's such a small part of the game. Somebody spent a lot of time on it.
I like to. Sorry, I started laughing as you're talking. So I like to imagine that there was one person on staff, and for the entire however many years this game was in development, that was their one job was smoothies.
There probably was.
People come into their office and it's just like rows of blenders on their desk. They're just like, I gotta figure this one out. This isn't making sense.
Like, all right, what if I add salt to the coconut? All right, this will be stamina.
All right, the game the most.
I mean, obviously, like I like the diversion and the way they changed up the core mechanics and just like rethought how to explore and gain new abilities through the echoes. Like that just works for me. Especially early on when you first get out to the main overworld, it's just like, oh, there's so much freedom and experimentation. So that part was the highlight of the game, and from there, I still enjoyed it afterwards, getting into all the different areas and dungeons and stuff. But that sort of opening up into the space of what was possible was the highlight of what I've played so far, and obviously do really like the the look and the music and all that stuff is really well done. So those are the highlights for me.
Yeah. And what about you, Ryan?
Yeah, I guess I would say this is pretty solid overall. Like we talked about, like maybe things like the dungeons and stuff don't stand out as much. But if I have to pick a few things, I think one is kind of like the traversing the world. As we mentioned, especially in the second half of the game where you have a lot, there's a lot to do, a lot of side quests, and there's a lot of freedom, and like using the echoes was pretty interesting. I think the echoes themselves were a pretty nice twist on kind of the basic gameplay. And sometimes there were weird interactions and things. And I'm not usually a big sandboxy guy, so it's nice that they had pretty straightforward solutions to a lot of problems and you could lean on those. But at the same time, like, you would get the interactions where it's like, oh, hey, I can put a block of water here and like drag enemies through it, right? And you could just do kind of fun and goofy stuff, or set things on fire, or like summon an army of some goofy enemy type like sea urchins, like surround an enemy with sea urchins and just watch them bounce around. So there were some pretty fun moments with the echoes. I think the other thing I'll say, and it sounds like we might disagree a bit on this, but I do like the way they executed, like, I thought it was kind of cool for Zelda to go on like a Zelda style adventure, but then, they didn't totally damsel Link. They made Link act like Link. And you kind of have this like co-op battle at the end, which is sort of how Zelda games usually go. Just, you're playing Link instead of Zelda. But anyway, that those are kind of like some things that come to mind for me.
All right, and last question to wrap up this podcast. What do you want to see next from Zelda? Where we kind of got this, at least to me, this game popping out this year was a surprise. But what do you want to see next? Before this game came out, I would have said I want to see. It feels like it's time for a more traditional top-down Zelda game and the Link to the Past or Link's Awakening mold. But given this is the top-down game we got, I don't think that's in the cards. And I know we're going to keep getting the tentpole big games from the Breath of the Wild Tears of the Kingdom team. That'll be another 3-4 years minimum away from right now. I think given that we're not going to get a traditional game anymore, like we're clearly in this more open sandboxy era of Zelda. I think I just want to keep seeing them try different mechanics, just get weird with it. I think it'd be fun if they experimented with more side games, maybe had more. It's going to be 6-7 years between the big games, like the Aonuma team, the Tears of the Kingdom team. Like they clearly take their time to make the big games. So I think it'd be nice if we could actually get more frequent, smaller games in between that just got weirder. I think maybe that's where I want to go at this point. Is just have them try goofier mechanics. I assume Grezzo's going to keep making things. Maybe they can get another team as well. Maybe we can have a third Zelda team, and not every game has to be a big, massive thing. Just have some more smaller experiments. I think would be kind of neat to see. Other than that, I don't really have any more specific thoughts. So, who wants to start off with what you're wanting from Zelda?
Yeah, I mean that's a tough question in general. I think my personal kind of thought on Nintendo and Zelda is just kind of like to let them cook and see what they come up with. I guess if I were thinking like picking something, this is the kind of game, and it's always we like to see is just something experimental, like you said, sort of in the 2D space that reference kind of riffs on Link's Awakening or other games. It's kind of what comes to mind in is like a bit of a short list is like, what they did with A Link Between Worlds that was kind of like remake-ish, but with its own mechanics and story and like, so maybe they could do something like that just with like the Wind Waker or some other property that could be something interesting to see in between the big tentpole Breath of the Wild type releases that they do.
Yeah.
I think we're missing the real question instead of what do we want to see from the next Zelda game. It's the question that I thought about the whole time I've been playing this game is how is this going to change Zelda's moveset in the next Super Smash Brothers?
They're going to incorporate this.
They have to.
So is it just going to be they make a separate Zelda character, or?
Yeah, who knows? I mean, we don't know what they're doing with Smash Bros. At this point, but yeah, I think they could make a whole moveset around just this game for sure. But yeah, in terms of actual Zelda, like I think clearly the direction and the energy of the Zelda franchise is just around like coming up with new ways to interact with and explore a big world. And I think so I want them to keep trying things in that vein, and like they've done a good job with it. And I think it's a cool thing that they are able to continue to just find new ways to like make it feel magical to explore a space. So I just want them to keep doing that.
What about you, Jax?
For me, I have two ideas. The first is the whole time I was playing this game, this is what I was thinking. I want to know what Link was doing. So I think they could release a whole game of this is what Link was doing during this time, because he was trapped in this other world and we don't know what that world looks like, right? Because maybe there's a deeper world that he was stuck in and they could just go crazy with it. Maybe it was an alternate Hyrule, and the places that Zelda was going to was kind of the bridge between the two worlds. So I don't
Maybe
know.
it's actually Lowrul. or maybe it's the Dark World.
Yeah, lone rule. Because I think there's something there because, until he comes back and then you work together at the very end, he was doing something. And you see him jumping around sometimes.
Maybe it's just a Link focused roguelike where he's just dying over and over.
Oh, no.
Oh, no. I mean, my first thought when you said what was Link doing the whole time was just like it's some just awful horror game of just like the worst nightmares imaginable that he has to suffer through.
Yeah. It's like a darker Link's Awakening.
Does that explain why he can't talk?
This is how Link became mute.
It's the trauma.
I don't like the way this is going, guys.
And then my other thing that I would think would be great to see at some point, which maybe they're not going to explore, is just a Sheik game. So not Smash Bros. Version. That's where you see her, but just to be proper, like you could probably make a whole game out of that.
There is a 7-year gap between young Link and adult Link and Ocarina that, what was Zelda doing all that time? How'd she become Sheik? There's a whole thing there you could do.
Exactly.
I had never thought about that until you just said it, but yeah, that'd be a cool idea.
Yeah. And like she can go stealth mode and there's probably people that have seen her and also just thought she was a dude the whole time, like I did. So yeah, you could have a whole game around that.
I get the sense that a lot of Zelda fans are Sheik fans, or at least some subset of Zelda fans are Sheik fans. That could be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. These are all great ideas. Let's get Aonuma on the phone. Get write up that contract. We'll make it happen. But for now, for ATACS, we are going to wrap up this podcast. This has been a good discussion about Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. Really enjoyed having this discussion with you all. Hope anyone listening also enjoyed it. I have been Flex, joined by Jax, Nate, and Ryan, and we are wrapping up this podcast, signing off. Thank you for listening, and we will see you next time on the ATACS podcast.